大家好，我是 James 王俊英。今天我要谈谈学生对语言老师应该抱有怎样的期望。以下的内容以英语为主。Let's get started. As an English teacher, fundamentally, I want to help my students achieve fluency in English. Let me give a technical definition of fluency. It is the ability to think in units of speech together with facility, so with ease, without strain, 没有挣扎，不太吃力 without inappropriate slowness, 说话的速度不会太慢 and without undue hesitation, 说话时不会有不适当的犹豫 Or put it simply, the goal of fluency should be to become as fluent in English for you as you would in Mandarin or your other mother tongue. And this is what I call deep and wide learning. And you can check out that video in the description below to hear more about that. Fluency means that in casual social settings, you can understand what people are saying immediately. You can laugh at their jokes at appropriate times. You can express yourself with accurate vocabulary, expressions, ease without hesitation, and naturally. Of course, when some of us think about achieving English fluency to this level, to your level of Mandarin, it could be very overwhelming because that goal is so high. But for those who have immigrated to North America, United States, or Canada, in order to be holistically successful in this society, you do need that level of fluency. And more than that, if you plan to start a family here, have children here, raise children here, you need this level of fluency even more because your children will inevitably become westernized. Their mother tongue will become English. And in order for you to understand them and communicate with them, you need to have more fluent English. As a teacher, I want to help my students achieve fluency, but I also want to coach my students to learn how to learn how to study better outside of our sessions, outside of the classroom setting. And this is because I believe the most effective long term language learning strategy is the immersion method. And there's another video on that in the description below. But the immersion method simply means that the classroom is only an aid to help you with your learning outside of the classroom in regular life. And so in the classroom, I would give tips in how you can learn and practice and study English better in every day. An analogy I like to use is from my experience in practicing karate, 空手道, when I was young. And I used to have practices in the dojo with a teacher about 2 to 3 times a week. But I realized at some point that for me to advance in my training, the bulk of my training needs to be on my own time. And so I began to train on my own about 2 hours a day. And then when I was in the dojo, the instructor would refine my technique, tell me what I should work on and practice at home. And I believe the same principle can apply for language learning. For me, as someone who grew up in the West, my main language is English. I have instead been trying to learn Mandarin for the recent years. And about a year and a half ago, my Mandarin teacher tutored me when I had time off work. And then during regular work months, she would teach me for 2 hours each month. Now, of course, if I just relied on those 2 hour sessions once a month to improve, I would improve very slowly. But instead, I immersed my whole life in Mandarin, whether it's to use a social media app called Clubhouse to chat with Mandarin speaking people around the world, or listen to Mandarin music, watch Mandarin shows, read Mandarin books, write down my thoughts in Mandarin, and so on. And as I was training on my own, I would have questions about Mandarin, like little bit of like specific questions, and I would then ask my tutor during our sessions, and she would become both my teacher and my coach for learning. So this is the mindset I hope to have for my students, to teach them, of course, in the classroom, in our sessions, but also to coach them and supplement their learning outside of the classroom. I want to talk about some expectations that I think students should have for a teacher, for me as a teacher. And there are of course obvious expectations like professionalism, being prepared for the lesson, being knowledgeable about English, of course. And I don't want to speak about those obvious expectations, but instead here I want to speak about specific expectations of a language teacher that relate directly to language learning. And the first area that I want to talk about is for a teacher, for me, to help my students overcome fear. Fear of making language mistakes, fear of embarrassment. I think that's actually the biggest internal struggle for language learning for adults. It's fear. A fear of using the wrong word, fear of wrong grammar, fear of the wrong pronunciation, fear of not understanding what people are saying or misunderstanding their question, and then feeling embarrassed, especially if people laugh because you made a mistake and maybe you feel that people are looking down on you. I was listening to a table talk on Youku on the show Yuan Zhuo Pai, and the Taiwanese model Meng Guangmei was sharing her experience of when she first started learning Cantonese in Hong Kong back in the late 1990s. She shared that she made all sorts of language mistakes, very embarrassing ones. And one example she gave was when she was eating dim sum at a dim sum restaurant. She wanted to order cai xin at the restaurant. She instead said, 我要除衫, which in Cantonese means 我要脱衣服, causing even the young girls at her table to make fun of her, laugh at her. And when she was reflecting on this experience, she mentioned and commented on it by saying, 她说，我觉得你要做好心理准备，脱离自己舒适带，你要放下很多这种尊严吧。And I agree with this. I think that when you're learning a language, you need to come out of your comfort zone. You need to be ready to feel uncomfortable. You need to get rid of just kind of put away a little bit about the self esteem in a sense because it's going to feel embarrassing. Sometimes it is even inevitable because you're meeting so many people that some people will make fun of you or laugh at you. And so that's why I do recommend that you find maybe more nicer friends, a more positive environment to learn English. This fear of making mistakes, this fear of embarrassment is a huge barrier to language learning because it keeps you from talking. And as the English saying goes, practice makes perfect. So if you're scared and you don't practice, how will you improve? In fact, by not practicing, you're not correcting the language mistakes you made, and you will keep making those same mistakes. You'll actually feel embarrassed more often because you're making mistakes more often. So the sooner you correct those mistakes, the more you don't need to encounter those embarrassing moments. And I think this is why many of us, when learning a second language as adults, find it so hard. See, as children, I want to use my daughter as an example. She's about 3.5 years old. She's learning English, of course, growing up here in Canada. We speak about a third of Cantonese at home. She speaks Cantonese with her grandparents and also Mandarin. I'm trying to get her to learn a little bit of Mandarin. She is in a daycare that speaks a little bit of Mandarin. And Zoe, my daughter, she even wants to learn French. Now, she makes all sorts of language mistakes. So, for example, in Mandarin, I've been teaching her how to count, 一二三四三四五六七八九十. In Mandarin, she can't pronounce 六 and 九 properly. She says 六 and jiao, right? She can't pronounce it. And she can't, in English, she can't say the word smell, when. She can't say the word smell, the SM sound. She always says fell. But the point I want to make is she doesn't feel embarrassed. She sees it as something that's funny. It's like a game, right? She laughs. But for adults, we feel self-conscious. And so we feel embarrassed. And so as a teacher, I want to assure my students that making mistakes is normal. It is necessary for improvement. The key is that you learn from your mistakes and you practice the correct word or pronunciation or grammar form. And I also want to say, if you're in North America, I would say especially if you're in Canada, because this is where I live, um, people are actually quite understanding and not very judgmental to immigrants learning a new language nowadays. So you don't actually need to be afraid. They're actually very open. And from me, if you were my student, you don't need to feel embarrassed if you don't know something in English. I'm not going to laugh at you. I'm not going to look down on you. There's no such thing as a stupid question if you are really asking that question. You need to learn about that aspect of English. In fact, I think when we as learners have questions and we don't ask because we're afraid, that's when we lose out. We remain ignorant. And so I want to make myself available as a positive support for my students. I'll be patient with you according to your level. And at the same time, I want to spur you on. I intend only to give constructive criticism to my students for your good, for your improvement, so that you can get better. I'm your cheerleader, I'm your supporter for your English learning success. And so, one aspect is supporting my students in overcoming fear. A second aspect that I want to support my students in is to support their motivation and personal discipline. I'm a firm believer that the student, him or herself, needs to take ownership for their own learning. So I can't create motivation for you. I certainly can't create your learning goals, those are very personal. But I can help you discover what your goals may be, refine them, support you to achieve those goals. And I also can't help you become self disciplined. You need to figure out how many hours each week you can commit to learning and practicing English. I'll support you by helping you create a program, a regiment that fits your level, in a pace that is not too easy, so that it's boring and you don't improve, and not too hard, so that you'll feel defeated or unmotivated. And according to the number of hours needed that you can commit to. And of course, I'll also help give you feedback so that you know what your progress is like. I actually think one of the best encouragements is when you get positive feedback naturally as you improve. So people complimenting that your English is better, or you're doing better at school if you're studying here in the West, or work is it's going more smoothly in terms of your communication, verbal communication in meetings or in email communication and so on. So I want to support your existing motivation, and I want to inspire you with my own language learning in Mandarin. You're learning English. 我希望我的中文学习的榜样能鼓励你，甚至鞭策你继续努力来学英语。And if your learning goal is focused on speaking and listening, I'll suggest many resources that you can try. You can pick the ones that work for you, and hopefully it'll be fun and interesting. If your learning goal involves reading English material, I want to get to know your interests so I can better suggest books that you'll find meaningful and enjoyable. And if your goal involves writing, I'll provide topics to write about that you're interested in or will help your personal development, or maybe even connected to your school or work setting. I want to support your own personal accountability. It means that your own commitment to your own goals. I can't ultimately keep you accountable, but I can be a supporter. I want to mention some other aspects of practical support, expectations that students can have of me as a teacher. And one other aspect is about you can expect me as a teacher to personalize an English training program for you that is according to your level, according to your needs, according to your goals. And that is the case for when I craft the time that we'll have together, how we'll spend our time, as well as the homework that I'll give before our sessions together. I want to craft it according to your goals. And um, and for your own personal training, I also want to craft it so that in your immersion learning method, as I will hope that you can commit to other types of learning, not just doing homework for me for our sessions, but lifelong learning. I'll give you resources for it, and I'll even offer many free and/or affordable resources. Um, and I do want to say that for some students, maybe having sessions with me is not as suitable because my service is directed more towards a higher level of English. And so in that case, I think there are probably more affordable tutoring services. And after a few sessions together, we might come to that conclusion together, and I might recommend those services to you that would be actually financially more affordable. So that's not a problem. I'll even send you the contact information because I have some of that information recorded when I was studying those organizations, and so I can refer those to you. And in the end, I want what's best for my students. And so, in order to personalize your learning, the first step is for you to fill out the student intake form, and you can see it in the description link below. You can just, even if you're not considering my service, you can even just check out some of the factors I consider in tailoring and crafting a program that is suitable for each student. Another expectation would be that for me, because I can speak Mandarin, I can give some instructions in Mandarin as well. But I do recommend overall that when we connect together, we would communicate mostly in English. You can, of course, share more difficult questions or language questions or cultural questions in Mandarin. If it's a struggle to ask them in English, and same thing for more difficult concepts and things like that. I can also explain it in Mandarin, but overall, I think it is wise that in our sessions together we communicate mainly in English because it gives you more exposure. And so it forces you to think in English, to speak in English, to listen in English, and it will help you improve more. But I do want to reiterate that if it's necessary, we can communicate in Mandarin. Another expectation is that you can expect that my overall strategy for my students for their language learning is effective communication. So, primarily speaking, we're not just working on grammar rules or just learning like a lot of vocabulary and things like that or specific phrases, but to help you communicate in your natural setting right now. And so we will work on some of those fundamental skills like grammar, punctuation and writing, vocabulary, with the exception of pronunciation. I think maybe for some people that want to improve on pronunciation, we'll spend more time on that. But generally speaking, I want to help you with the four major skills in communication, which is listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Another expectation that you can have for me as a teacher is within our sessions, I'll be sharing a lot about Western culture, and especially in Canada and United States. I believe that language and culture are embedded within each other. And in order to be fully fluent in a language, you need to be fluent in the culture. And some academics call this cultural intelligence, 文化智商, cultural intelligence. It means for you to have cultural intelligence, you need to have the knowledge of that culture. So, for example, one aspect of Western culture is that it is a more equal society rather than a hierarchical society. The technical term is egalitarian. And another aspect is not just knowledge, but you understand cultural practices, like how to greet someone. When do you shake hands? When do you give a hug? When is it appropriate? What you should or should not talk about in different settings or at work. And so I want to share some of this cultural knowledge and practice with you in our sessions together so that it can help you in your life here in North America. So, for example, if you're in a Western company, especially in a tech company, it's you may have a manager that's maybe a younger person, and maybe that relationship is more informal, more friendly. The manager might even want you to address them by his or her first name, and so it won't feel so hierarchical. And so I want to share about those aspects, and maybe it will help you function better, to operate better in your setting. Another aspect of cultural intelligence, CQ, cultural quotient. Okay, 文化智商 quotient, because IQ is intelligence quotients. 所以文化智商是cultural quotient. Is to understand the cultural products, and so that's food or events such as like Christmas in December or Easter in April, or Canadian holidays, for example, if you're in Canada. So, for example, we have a new national holiday called the Truth and Reconciliation Day. I can explain a little bit about that. And in our sessions together, you can ask me about Western culture. Hopefully, that will be helpful to you. The final aspect of support and expectation for me, for my students, is that I want to provide even ongoing support outside of our sessions via messaging like WhatsApp or Weixin, WeChat, and so on. And so, in that avenue, I'll provide additional resources for your training. If you find other language resources, you can ask me for my feedback. I can give you some comment and things like that. Ask me questions about the assignment or some of the resources that I suggested for you to create your own immersive environment in learning. And also, another aspect of just ongoing support would be that we'll have an assessment. So, for example, if you sign up with 10 sessions with me, we'll have some debrief along the way. That debrief will not be part of our the paid session, if you will, but we can talk about that. We can even have a phone call or something, and where you can give me feedback. As in, I would ask you, do you feel an improvement learning with me? How would you like me to adjust my teaching method? Which areas do you want me to help us focus on? And I'll give you feedback on your progress and other areas of improvement as well. And so I hope this gives potential students an idea of what to expect from me as a teacher. And I really hope to see you next time. Take care.